Welcome to the definitive UFO news show where we dig into the biggest UFO headlines, the fight for disclosure, and the push for transparency. This isn't just news, it's real discussion. We break down the stories, examine the possibilities, and explore the unanswered questions in the search for the truth. No political spin, no biased reviews, just the facts, the analysis, and yes, the conversations that move the needle. I'm your host, Mr. Rob G. Guess what? It's time to dig in. We're going to go ahead and jump right on into this show. We have a pretty good show set up. You know, we set the show up for last week. And as you all know, the headlines hit where all of a sudden we have this asteroid that's supposed to potentially impact Earth in the year 2032. Yeah, that 1.2% chance is what they gave us. It was like 1 in 67 chance that this would happen. After a few days, I was like, okay, well, maybe we won't cover it because after looking into it, okay, that's pretty low. That's about average, usually drops off from that point. But as we've seen, it stayed in the news and the odds have actually gone up. Okay. And it's a reason to be concerned. It's when I look up at the sky, and even before UFOs, before I had the realization that these things were up there all the time, I would look at the sky in fear of something like that coming out of the sky, because we know historically it's been a real thing, and it's always been something that has been in the back of my mind when I would look up. Um, and recently it's been made popular by movies like Don't Look Up, which that's a bad ending, obviously. But then you have movies like Armageddon, where they fly out to the asteroid, they plant these explosives, and they sacrifice a life or two in order to save the planet, and the asteroid splits apart and misses Earth completely. Beautiful day. Humanity lives on. Then you have Deep Impact, where, yeah, things didn't go so well in that iteration of what Armageddon potentially would look like, uh, in the face of something as horrific as that and as challenging as that. So we're going to go ahead and cover that today, for the fact that it's staying in the news and the odds keep going up. And, it's not like this is some earth changing rock. However, I guess it could be considered that they call it a city killer. So apparently it's big enough to wipe out an entire city. Now, I would definitely think by the time this came around to be, at the very least, if we couldn't deflect it or I'm sure we'd probably have the area evacuated. But just the thought of something coming out of the sky and impacting the earth in that fashion, something big enough to leave a scar that we would remember for the rest of our lives. Anyone alive at this moment, from a child, from a baby, would have this in their memory for at least the next 100 years, right? Average human lifetime expectancy. So it's a big thing to cover, and it was big enough to cover that they actually had a live Q&A on it this morning, which I was unaware of until a few hours before the show, so I was able to check that out. And we're gonna get into talking about that. We're gonna cover some of the cases where things have not, where we may have kind of made it by. Let me go ahead and actually welcome some folks in. I know some folks came in. I know some folks will be watching this on the replay, which is all love to everybody out there. But let me see. Let me definitely just make sure I recognize whoever has shown up so far. Magneticus Attractus, I believe, is here. Pretty sure I see Magneticus out there. I do see Richard Minnick in the building. Good evening, sir. Saying, I ain't afraid of no space rocks. Okay. You say that until one falls out the sky. What did it say? Mike Tyson said, everybody got a plan to someone till you get punched in the mouth, right? And that would be definitely a gut punch for humanity for sure. Lil Cam 51 is present. Appreciate you showing on up. Eternity Eternal saying, hi, Rob G. Hi, Eternity Eternal. And we got Hillbilly Herb, Hillbilly Herb, and yeah, that kind of herb as you see on the screen. Thanks for coming on in. We got Kai Schneider. I need to know how to pronounce that right. Let me know, Kai or Cow. I believe it's Kai. I believe it's Kai. Magneticus Attractus coming in saying deploy Operation Thor in 2032, whatever that is. I hope we got something planned. I hope we got something planned. And we'll kind of get into that as well. Who else do we have? Yeah, he said Hillbilly Herb said, "Yeah, that's a bad ending." Yeah, there was a couple movies where it didn't end off so well, right? We hope not to be in that situation. This asteroid doesn't appear to be that, but it can still leave, I think, an emotional impact on the world. For a full lifetime, right? And maybe even more than that. Maybe kids that are just babies in 2032, this will be definitely a story. If this were to happen, this would be a story they would be telling their kids and grandkids. So it'd probably affect the next few generations after that, before, things would mentally probably get reeled back in, right? Let's see, who else do we have out here? We have Frankie B saying, "What's up, bro? What's up, Frankie B? Thanks for coming on in. Appreciate you showing on up." Magnetics has got his fire insurance paid. Well, I guess that's the big part of it, right? You might want other insurances paid too, because I think it'd be more than a fire you'd be dealing with there. As we get ready to get into the show, so I want to just start this off because I have a couple things want to talk about. But the first thing is when we're talking about asteroids, we're talking about space, right? This infinite space. We know we have an asteroid belt. We know there are massive rocks out there. There are some very small, and actually, Earth has small objects that pass through the atmosphere every day. We see them as shooting stars. They burn up in the atmosphere, no big deal. Even something that we would consider sort of large, if it were right here in front of you, and I just picked it up and dropped it on your head, it probably would be lethal to you, or it would hurt you really bad. But even those sorts of objects burn up in the atmosphere, no big deal. And so we have some sort of protection because of our atmosphere, obviously, and the friction that kind of happens once these objects enter the atmosphere, right? They heat up, burn up, split up usually, no big deal. Fall in the ocean usually because it's 70% water, the planet. So there usually isn't really anything that we've had to deal with. However, this one keeps staying in the news, right? And 2032, when you talk about that, that's only 7 years from now. And you would think, okay, if we're able to track it that entire time, that's great, but we won't be able to. Actually, it'll be only a couple more months that we'll still be able to see it, before it disappears for, I think, about 3 years. So we won't see it again. And then really we won't know what we're really dealing with until then, until 2028, which if this did end up being something crazy, we would have less than 4 years on the clock. Not a lot of time, right? So we're going to kind of go into this a little bit. Just kind of want to preface this. You have all different types of asteroids. You have small ones, big ones, medium sized ones. So small asteroids about 1 to 20 meters. So that's about 3 to 60 feet, right? Frequency, we get those several times a year that actually come in and impact Earth. They typically burn up in the atmosphere. Not really a big deal. The medium-sized asteroids about 50 to 150 meters, so about 150 to 450 feet, 500 feet roughly. We get those every 500 to 1,000 years, and from what I understand, the one that they're talking about falls into this medium-sized category. It's pretty big. It's actually pretty big. The Something like this could actually flatten a city or cause regional devastation. If it lands in the ocean, it could trigger a tsunami and likely would trigger a tsunami. Then you have the large asteroids, which are like over a mile wide, a kilometer or more. So a kilometer or more, just think that's a mile up to who knows what size. I believe the size that knocked out the dinosaurs was the size of Mount Everest. If you can imagine Mount Everest falling out of the sky, and what that type of scene would look like. These are the things that I thought about a lot of most of my life, really, since I had the realization that rocks can fall from the sky, right? And yeah, it's very troubling to think of. You always hope and wish you never have to see anything like this within your lifetime. Most people won't. It's very rare that these things happen, these sort of larger events or ones that would really, cause any sort of fuss. So a lot of people don't have to deal with it. You may think about it every day of your life, but you really don't have to actually deal with the incident. Then you have the ones that we really hope we don't see, which are 10 kilometers or larger, which are like extinction level event asteroids. Those ones happen every 50 to 100 million years. Could cause mass extinction events similar to the asteroid that wiped out those dinosaurs 66 billion years ago. And they've always said with a window like that, they're talking about this happened 50 to 100 million years. If the dinosaurs were struck by an asteroid 66 billion years ago, then obviously we're in that ballpark where something like that could take place. Here's where it gets tricky. This is where it gets tricky. NASA and other space agencies track over 90% of large asteroids, which is a great thing. They say that they have a lot of the what they call planet killers pretty much tracked, but 95% is still, when you think about just say there's 100,000 of them out there, that means 95,000 of them are being tracked 10 kilometers or larger, whereas 5,000 of them aren't being or haven't been found or tracked yet, right? So that's troubling. That part is still troubling. And that's kind of what we're going off here, right? Because when we talk about the 1.2%, as this came out, a few weeks ago about this asteroid, we're like, oh, that's very low. It's 1.2%. But when you think about it, that's a pretty big number. And I believe it's like 1% is where the alarms start going off for these astronomers as far as, hey, you should probably pay attention. 2% is like, yeah, you should pay attention. 3% is like, dude, let's hold a press conference for this. And they actually had a live Q&A earlier today, which we'll end up talking about. But even the smaller ones, like the one we're talking about now, which is, I believe, like in the 150-meter range, those ones, are harder to detect. And sometimes we don't even see them coming in, which is the scariest part of it all. Because if you don't even have any notice, and then all of a sudden something just falls out of the sky, you pretty much don't have any time to react. And then there goes that story. So before we really hop into that, I did want to bring something up. I was made aware that Gary Nolan actually had came out with this 26-page document, and I wanted to touch on it. And let me actually bring this up real quick before we jump in to asteroids. This was pretty, when I looked at this, I'm like, okay. And let me make sure that I can do this before we jump all the way in. So Gary Nolan put together a paper, a 26-page paper that is going to be something that might resonate with you guys if you remember some of the shows that we've recently done here, as it did with me. And I'm going to go ahead and bring this stuff up. Okay, but first, let me go ahead and say hello to, actually, let me put the phone number out there. The phone number, if you need to call in for any reason, on this show, we don't take live calls, but we do the late night call-in show. So make sure you have this number if you don't already have it. 856-843-3444. That's 856 the dig. If you're calling from outside the United States, that's 001 first, then 856-843-3444 or 001-856 the dig. Want to go ahead and obviously thank our members here as well before we get the show going. because they keep the show going. Become a social soldier today. You can do that anytime by clicking on the description in the show, and you'll see a link for that. Currently, we have Ann Joanne, the Beekeeper, D. Nunley, Maggie M10, Flat 6, Miss Catherine Jones, Cosmic Joe Chronicles, Wes W. Decker, Still Pooh 69, Polly Rodderman, Lil Cam 51, Frankie B, and Fast Timmy. All right. Appreciate you guys for helping us be able to put these shows on. And okay, getting into this. Gary Nolan, Dr. Gary Nolan, releases a manual on dealing with debunkers. Now, where have we heard something similar to this? This is the cheat sheet to deal with the cult-like mentality and approach of extreme skeptics. Imagine that. I almost recall that we did a show recently on skeptics versus experiencers, and this kind of rings to what it was that we did, so which I think is awesome, because that either means that potentially Gary Nolan has checked out our show here and liked the idea, or something even better than that we're like-minded individuals and we're thinking on the same page, which is still an awesome thing. And if it is the previous, we would love to have you on, Dr. Gary Nolan. So if you are out there and you do watch the show, or someone that definitely come on the show, or we'll have you on Spaced Out Radio. Either or, I would love to holler at you anytime. So I thought it was awesome what he did, and I'm going to go ahead and bring up the paper. And we're going to go over 10 of these only. He had 26 pages. They're pretty short pages, so I'm going to go over a few of these as I go ahead and bring the screen up here. So, this is answering the rhetoric of the debunker, which I think is beautiful. And I think it's needed. I think he probably articulates it a lot better, especially as far as coming from the the mind of a professor here. So, number one, cynical editorial targeting disdained insights. Summary. This trick involves focusing on minor flaws and convenient issues in an argument to dismiss it entirely, avoiding deeper investigations into the unknown. Example related to UAP: a skeptic writes an article mocking a UFO sighting by highlighting a shaky video recording, ignoring multiple credible eyewitness accounts, and radar data that support the event. This is how you answer a skeptic that has this opinion, or a debunker. So, highlight comprehensive evidence, emphasize that dismissing the sighting based on the shaky video ignores substantial supporting evidence from credible sources that warrants serious consideration. And number two, encourage deeper investigation. Point out that focusing on minor flaws prevents us from exploring and understanding potential phenomena that could expand our knowledge. 3, promote scientific inquiry. Advocate for examining all available data thoroughly rather than selectively targeting convenient issues to dismiss the entire subject. Highly comprehensible evidence. By fixating on the shaky video, aren't you overlooking the credible eyewitness accounts and radar data that also support this UAP event? Encourage deeper investigation. Instead of dismissing the entire phenomena over a minor flaw, shouldn't we explore the substantial evidence that warrants deeper investigation and then promote scientific inquiry? Is it truly scientific to focus on convenient issues while ignoring the broader data that could expand our understanding of UAPs? And there's a lot more to this, and it's a lot more like that. And I won't go over every single page, but I will say on this next page here, you'll start to see you can literally go back to the show that we did a few weeks ago, and I would have loved to have his input on something like this, right? So, enforcing the null hypothesis as truth. Instead of testing the null hypothesis to potentially falsify it, Debunkers assume it is true without proper investigation. Great minds think alike. This is what lets me know that the things that we do, we're on the right path. Like we're thinking, we're having the right thoughts, right? Because initially when we did the show, I'd done a show previously like that one about a year earlier, but it's a topic that people aren't talking about within the field. So, to get that backed up by a professor at Stanford, Dr. Gary Nolan, I think is pretty awesome, and I think kind of validates that when we have these conversations that we are talking about the right things, right? That's what it does for me. And I'll read a few more of these off the list here. So, example related to UAP. A debunker asserts that all UFO sightings are misidentifications or hoaxes, refusing to consider any evidence that might suggest otherwise. Answers: clarify scientific methodology. Explain that science requires us to test and possibly falsify the null hypothesis, not accept it without question. Demand evidence based conclusions. Stress that conclusions should be drawn from thorough analysis of evidence, not from the assumptions or biases. And then advocate for open mindedness, right? Yes. Encourage considering all possibilities and evidence to arrive at a well supported understanding of UAP phenomena. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Clarified scientific methodology. Does assuming the null hypothesis is true without testing align with the scientific method that we both value? Demand evidence-based conclusions. Without thoroughly analyzing evidence, how can we justifiably conclude that all UFO sightings are mere misidentifications or hoaxes? Advocate for open-mindedness. Could dismissing evidence outright prevent us from uncovering potential truths about UAP phenomena? Just awesome stuff. And I was so glad to see that he did this. And it just, once again, it just lets me know that what we are doing, we're doing the right thing. We're having the right conversation. I'll kind of skim through these, just the titles here. Number 4, misdirection using selective skepticism and Occam's razor. Some debunkers use selective skepticism and misapply Occam's razor to force conclusions that align with their preconceived notions, disregarding contrary evidence. Next page. Masquerading activism as skepticism. Debunkers present their efforts as skepticism when they are actually engaging in activism aimed at suppressing ideas that they oppose. We talked about that. That's like the cult-like mentality that extreme skeptics have. And this is awesome. I would love, man, if anyone knows Nolan, tell him to hit me up. Tell him to hit me up. Fomenting conflict for personal gain. Debunkers create and exploit conflicts between science and the public on controversial topics to enhance their own authority or celebrity. He hit the nail on the head with this one, I'm telling you. I'm glad he put it out in a book format where a lot of people could just download this booklet and there it is, right? Defending beliefs rather than seeking the truth. This is a big one. This is really what we were talking about. People often prefer to justify their existing beliefs instead of being open to changing their minds when faced with new evidence. Awesome stuff. Okay, page 8 of his booklet. If I can get there. Okay. Focusing on minor issues to avoid the bigger picture. Debunkers concentrate on insignificant details to discredit an argument while ignoring extensive supporting evidence. And then 9, claiming proof from absence of evidence. Debunkers assert that because there is no definitive evidence, a phenomena does not exist, which is an extraordinary claim in itself. Yeah, this is true. And then mocking scientific method with biased conclusions. Debunkers use biased data in arguments from ignorance to enforce a predetermined conclusion, undermining genuine scientific inquiry. Bravo. I wish I had the applause button for Gary Nolan on this. Because, like I said, either he's tuned in with us and he's sitting in the crowd right now and he watched the show as we presented it, or was on team rewatch, or at the very least, we are thinking the same thing. And these are the things that you have to present in order to move the conversation forward, right? And it's beautiful. I'm just so glad to see it. I'm just really so glad. So I had to put that in the show before we actually got into it, because when I saw it, I was like, hey, we talked about that just the other day. All right. Now, getting into the meat and potatoes of the show, back to the asteroids, right? So we all recently saw the film Don't Look Up. Very, very sad, heart-wrenching film, right? To see humanity in a moment where the future would not exist for most people on the planet, right? Then we have in our news cycle, talk of something that has a chance of hitting the planet and at least wiping the city out, which is a big deal. And then when I heard that, I'm thinking in my mind, okay, will we have one of these 1 in 1,000 year asteroid impacts before we actually get disclosure? Before we actually get to disclosure, are we going to have these 1 in 1,000 year impacts, which is just mind blowing that something like that could come before something that should be more readily available to us, like disclosure, right? The answers are all here, but at the pace that we're going, in the window of time that we're working with, it feels like realistically, if this is 7 years out, this could happen before we actually get a disclosure, right? And that's kind of why we're doing the show. Not necessarily because of the asteroid and the threat there, even though there is a threat, but just the irony that you could have an event that could affect humanity in an adverse fashion, in such an adverse fashion, when you have disclosure on the horizon, right? So that's what we'll be talking about. And we will be starting it off with an event that some people felt, but most people weren't really able to speak to because of where this happened and the time that it happened, and that would have been the Tunguska asteroid of 1908, a parent asteroid. I think they said they found debris, or they found material that was from off planet that leads them to believe that this was an asteroid that didn't impact, but it exploded over this area, caused like an energy burst, which ended up knocking these trees on their ends. There were, I actually have the information here. This happened June 30th, 1908. And the location was the Tunguska River, Siberia, Russia. The estimated size of this particular object was about 50 to 60 meters, so about 160 to 200 feet in diameter. The energy released by this object was 10 to 15 megatons of TNT, so about 1,000 times the Hiroshima bomb, or Hiroshima, which however you want to say it. The impact type was an airburst, exploded in the atmosphere, never actually hit the ground. And is obviously this circle area is apparently where the airburst would have hit the ground and then spread outwards, I guess, is the idea. Because for miles and miles, the trees were knocked down and they were also lit on fire. And apparently, this was done at a time where all these trees were covered in snow. So, to think about the amount of heat, flash heat, that had to happen in a moment like that, to take trees covered with snow and turn them into kindle is amazing, right? And this is something that happened, what was 120, almost 120 years ago, 117 years ago. So not very long ago. There were actually no confirmed human deaths due to it being so remote. However, there was massive destruction, which we'll talk about. So what happened? Around 7:14 a.m. local time, a bright fireball streaked across the sky in the Siberian sky. Moments later, a massive explosion occurred 5 to 10 kilometers or 3 to 6 miles above the ground, releasing an energy blast equivalent to a large nuclear bomb. It flattened 2,150 square kilometers, which is 830 square miles. Let me bring some imagery up from that. And actually, let me bring this up here. People up to 65 kilometers or 40 miles away were knocked off their feet by the shock wave. That is insane. 40 miles away, knocked off their feet by the shock wave. Glass shattered in villages hundreds of kilometers away. Seismic waves registered across Europe and Asia. A strange glowing sky was reported across Europe for days after the event, probably due to dust in the upper atmosphere. Now, the leading theory, because I guess no one actually saw this coming in, the leading theory is that a small asteroid or comet about 50 to 60 meters wide entered the Earth's atmosphere. So it is at a 150 to 180 feet entered the Earth's atmosphere, traveling at 27 kilometers per second or 60,000 miles per hour. Wow. As it descended, air resistance caused it to heat up rapidly. The object exploded mid-air due to intense pressure, 5 to 10 kilometers above the ground. No impact crater was found because it disintegrated before reaching the surface. So why wasn't it more catastrophic? The remote location in Siberia prevented mass casualties. If Tunguska had exploded over a city like New York or London, it could have killed millions. So just happenstance where this thing ended up exploding, if it had done so over in 1908, you still had decently populated cities, especially New York and London, would have killed millions in this incident. A rock that fell out the sky. Now, granted, we weren't really able to track things like that, and so it kind of, it obviously didn't have any warning that it was coming in, but it's just the impact of just one event, something coming from the sky that was able to cause this sort of damage that luckily did not strike where a population center of people were. Now, because of this incident, and I want to say they didn't even find this immediately. They didn't find this until, or actually get out to be able to see the damage because of how remote it is. It was like till they did an expedition, and I believe in 1927. So it was like 19 years after this is when they actually got to the location to verify the damage. And you got to imagine what the person, I forget the gentleman's name who actually did the exhibition, but you have to think of what his thoughts were when he got there and he saw this massive, destruction. Trees laid out, huge trees laid on their sides, burnt to a crisp. Some trees still standing. just like toothpicks. And this happened from a rock that came out the sky, apparently. Right? This is real stuff. This is real stuff. The other one I want to show you, or actually the next one, this is obviously the worst one that has happened, I think they said, in the last 1,000 years in recorded history for, current day for human beings that we can recall. The other one was not too long ago. It was the Chelyabinsk comet. They're calling it a comet. Asteroid, comet, doesn't matter for me. A rock out of the sky is a rock out of the sky. I don't care what kind of label you put on it. A rock out of the sky is a rock out of the sky. You remember this one. This was all over the news. And in the middle of the morning, this thing just appeared out of the sky. Now, here's the thing about this. This one was about 20 meters wide, 66 feet. This was not detected at all before impact. Even with the detection that the capabilities we have and had in 2013, which are obviously better now, but we still had the ability to detect, and we were detecting things out there, but this one was not seen prior to it entering the atmosphere. So literally, the moment you see this thing show up on camera is the moment that we knew this was coming in. And if you count from the moment that you first see it till when it fizzles out or exploded, we're talking about seconds. So we're talking about going from having no clue that this was coming to within seconds, whatever was going to happen, happened, right? So luckily it didn't impact the ground and exploded over the town, but it still caused extensive damage. And actually, I think I have a video clip that we can look at that actually shows when this came in. I remember when I first saw this, it just brought it home more for me that we have no clue what is up in the sky or what can fall down from us in the sky, right? So this is a little video. I believe NASA put this out right after this incident happened. So let's take a look at this.
Presented by Science at NASA. When the sun rose over Russia's Ural Mountains on Friday, February 15th, many residents of nearby Chelyabinsk already knew that a space rock was coming. Later that day, an asteroid named 2012 DA14 would pass by Earth only 17,200 miles above Indonesia.
So to be clear, there were two rocks that came in that day. So we knew one of them was coming, which is the one that did not hit Earth, the one that we predicted was going to pass in between the Earth and the moon. But the Chelyabinsk object we did not know was coming. So let's be clear on that.
Danger of a collision, NASA assured the public. Maybe that's why, when the morning sky lit up with a second sun and a shockwave shattered windows in hundreds of buildings around Chelyabinsk, only a few people picking themselves off the ground figured it out right away. This was not a crashing plane or a rocket attack. It was a meteor strike, the most powerful since the Tunguska event of 1908, says Bill Cook of NASA's Meteoroid Environment Office. In a one-in-a-million coincidence that still has NASA experts shaking their heads, a small asteroid completely unrelated to 2012 DA14 struck Earth only hours before the publicized event. These are rare events, and it is incredible to see them happening on the same day, says Paul Chodas of NASA's Near-Earth Object Program at JPL. Researchers have since pieced together what happened. The most telling information came from a network of infrasound sensors operated by the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization. Their purpose is to monitor nuclear explosions. Infrasound is a type of very low-frequency sound wave that only elephants, homing pigeons, and a few other animals can hear. It turns out that meteors entering Earth's atmosphere cause ripples of infrasound to spread through the air of our planet. By analyzing infrasound records, it is possible to learn how long a meteor was in the air, which direction it traveled, and how much energy it unleashed. The Russian meteor's infrasound signal was detected by multiple stations, including one in Alaska more than 6,500 kilometers from Chelyabinsk. Western Ontario professor of physics Peter Brown analyzed the data. The asteroid was about 17 meters in diameter and weighed approximately 10,000 metric tons, he reports. It struck Earth's atmosphere at 40,000 miles per hour and broke apart about 12 to 15 miles above Earth's surface. The energy of the resulting explosion exceeded 470 kilotons of TNT. For comparison, the first atomic bombs produced only 15 to 20 kilotons. Based on the trajectory of the fireball, analysts have also plotted its orbit. It originally came from the asteroid belt, about 2.5 times farther from the Sun than Earth, says Cook. Comparing the orbit of the Russian meteor to that of 2012 DA-14, NASA orbit analysts have shown that there is no connection between the two. These are independent objects, Cook says. The fact that they reached Earth on the same day, one just a little closer than the other, appears to be a complete coincidence. Infrasound records confirm that the meteor entered the atmosphere at a shallow angle of about 20 degrees and lasted more than 30 seconds before it exploded. The loud report, which was heard and felt for hundreds of miles, marked the beginning of a scientific scavenger hunt.
Wow.
Thousands of fragments of the meteor are now scattered across the Ural countryside, and a small fraction have already been found. Preliminary reports, mainly communicated through the media, suggest that the asteroid was made mostly of stone with a bit of iron. In other words, a typical asteroid from beyond the orbit of Mars, says Cook. There are millions more just like it. And that is something to think about as the cleanup in Chelyabinsk continues.
So think about that. They said 1 in a million chance of the incident happening. When we're talking about this asteroid that's in the news, it's down to like 1 in 32 chance of hitting Earth. So when you think about that, right, it's like, okay, NASA has us to feel like, okay, there's a very low chance of hitting, which could be true, but it's still, the odds are a lot better than 1 in a million. And this incident happened, you saw it. And that's the concerning part about it, right? And the other part being that it came in completely undetected. They had no idea that was coming in. And had it come at a different angle, it came in more at this angle instead of more of a downward trajectory, right? If it came in at more of a downward trajectory, it would have had a better chance of actually striking. And then what would the damage have been? In this event, with it exploding, would they say 5 to 10 miles above the surface, it still injured over 1,600 people, damaged 7,200 buildings. And they recovered a really nice sized piece out of a lake. I guess it broke a hole through the ice in the lake. They were able to recover that, and that's a huge boulder, right? So that survived. That huge piece of rock that they were able to get back from that survived. And it's just this is the nightmare scenario that I think of. One where we don't know that it's coming in, and it just shows up. We can't do anything to deflect at that point. We can't do anything. We're spectators at that point. We're sitting back and we're watching, hopefully not the end of humanity take place right before our eyes. And it's probably something that you wouldn't want to even think about or talk about, but it's literally a reality that we have. And it's just the irony that something like this could happen before we get to a point to where we get disclosure. And I'm gonna talk to you about what the hook in that is and why I'm using those two things together, because I think there's a strong point or message at the end of all this that I think we can get to. So make sure you stick around for that. Make sure you don't go anywhere. Stick around for that. So why wasn't this meteor detected? It approached from the direction of the sun, making it nearly impossible for ground-based telescopes to see it before it entered into the atmosphere. Its sudden appearance and intense explosion shocked scientists and served as a wake-up call about asteroid detection limitations. the most powerful impact event since the Tunguska event of 1908. And we have a few more images of it as well. I know you guys all remember this. This is insane, an insane sight to see. Very, very creepy. So now we're going to get into these are the ones that we know about. These are more unforeseen events that actually kind of we saw, but we didn't really have any time to react, right? So that was undetected. These ones are more ones that we saw come in, that we knew were coming in, but we're talking about only hours before they actually entered the atmosphere. So you have 2008 TC3, October 8th, or October 7th, 2008. 4 meters in size, so not very big. We detected this 20 hours before impact. Located impact location would have been Sudan. The first asteroid detected before impact broke apart in the atmosphere and fragments were recovered. 2014 AA, January 1st, 2014. 2 to 4 meters. Again, not too big, but 12 feet, that's a pretty big rock, Detected it 21 hours before impact. Impact location was the Atlantic Ocean. Entered the Earth's atmosphere the day after being discovered. One day. 2028 LA, June 2nd, 2018. 2.6 meters. Detected 8 hours before impact. Botswana, Africa. Burned up over the Kalahari Desert. Fragments were later recovered. 2019 MO, June 22nd, 2019. 4 meters. Detected 12 hours before impact. Impact location, Caribbean Sea. Exploded in the atmosphere over the ocean. 2019 OK, July 25th, 2019. Just a few years ago, 6 years ago almost. Size 57 to 130 meters. What is that? 160 to roughly 400 feet. Detected one day before the closest approach, and it approached 73 kilometers from Earth. That's nothing. That is right outside the atmosphere. A much larger asteroid that passed within 1/5 of the moon's distance. That's pretty big. We're talking about one day before the closest approach, we saw this, and then it just passed by luckily, right? Luckily, it passed by without incident. 2020 QG, August 16th, 2020. 3 meters in size. We detected it 6 hours after closest approach. Closest approach was 2,900 kilometers above the Indian Ocean. Passed extremely close to the Earth and was only detected after it flew by. 2022 EB5, March 11th, 2022, size 2 meters. Detected 2 hours before impact. Impact location near Iceland. Entered the atmosphere and burned up over the North Atlantic Ocean. And that's what a lot of these smaller ones do. They just burn up. I guess it really depends on the composition. If it's rocky, if it's metallic, depends on it depends on the size of the object, if it will burn up in the atmosphere or not. The metallic ones, the steel ones, iron, those ones don't break up as easily, right? So those are the ones that are the real threat. And how do you know if you haven't even detected it? How do you know the composition? Before it's already here, and that's the biggest thing. So you have 2022 WJ1, November 19th, 2022. Just 3 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, right? 1 meter detected 4 hours before impacted near Lake Ontario, Canada, discovered by the Catalina Sky Survey, creating a bright fireball. 2023 CX1, February 13th, 2023, 1 meter in size, detected 7 hours before impact. Impact location was France, entered the atmosphere and burned up, producing a bright fireball. Then you have 2024 BX1, which was just last January, so about a year ago, 1 meter in size, detected 3 hours before impact, impacted in Germany, entered the Earth's atmosphere, and burned up over Germany. So just a lot of events in these. It started 2008 was the first one we looked at there, right? So that's 17 years of at least 10 different objects that were just barely detected before we knew they were here. And that just goes back to what we were talking about earlier when they were talking about, yeah, we were tracking a lot of those big objects out there, the planet killers, the one they call planet killers, but 95% of them still leaves a lot of them that they haven't found yet. Right? Because I don't know, in 95%, I don't know how many asteroids that covers. We know there's a lot of asteroids in asteroid belt. And so is it 100,000? Is that the number? Is it higher than that? Right? Because even at 10,000, which we know is likely more, I would think, but I don't know. But 5% is still a too big of a gray area when we're talking about rocks that are big enough to destroy an entire planet, right? So, what would be the impact to humanity, right? Which I think is an important thing to kind of get into, right? So, some of this, we talked about different size ones. A lot of the ones we just talked about were pretty small, a meter, 3 meters, 4 meters. Those usually burn up, as we talked about here, in the atmosphere. So the atmosphere kind of protects us from a lot of those small ones, because if we didn't have an atmosphere, everything would hit us like we see on the moon, all those crater marks from even small little objects to impact. They leave craters. We'd be pockmarked, I'm sure, all over the place. But when we're looking at this, what would be the impact to humanity? So if we had a small object, small asteroid like the Chelyabinsk 2013 object or smaller, an airburst event, if the asteroid is small, 20 meters or less, so 60 feet or less, and will explode in the atmosphere, the primary dangers are shock waves and shattered glass. So an event like that, you just stay away from windows, because the shock wave can break glass and cause injuries. You seek shelter indoors. Sturdy buildings provide protection, so you'd be okay there. Don't look at the fireball, obviously. It could be blinding. Duck and cover. So a lot of, basic things that we do for other catastrophic situations, right? Like earthquakes and things of that nature. Things that we can kind of handle, right? And you get into the medium-sized ones, which is really more of where the object that we're talking about, the 2032 object, kind of falls in this medium category. So the medium-sized asteroid, which would be 50 to 200 meters, so about 150 to 600 feet. This is going to be local or regional, have a local or regional impact. So if an asteroid is large enough to cause significant damage, but not a global catastrophe, we'd be following evacuation orders. Authorities would determine if we need to leave the area. Just like with the one in 2032, it's going to be regional if it does hit the planet, and we'll, I'm sure, be able to evacuate ahead of time. So as far as lives go, I think we'll be okay there, right? I think we should be okay there. Moving inland, if the ocean impact is expected, a tsunami could follow. As we'll see in a little bit, you'll see the kind of graph of where they project this thing could hit if it were to hit Earth in 2032. They kind of have a little track drawn out so you can kind of see if your area would be affected. Most of us not. Then, from what I saw, the countries that it would hit, I don't think any of you are currently located there, but you could have family members there. Who knows? Um, moving inland because the ocean impact tsunamis. Obviously, we've seen that in movies. Find underground shelter. A basement or underground parking structure can reduce exposure or heat to blast waves. And then stocking up on supplies, which prepping, right? Just essentially doomsday prepping. Now, the scary ones. We get into the larger ones, which these ones, man, I really hope we don't see, right? But a kilometer or more, this is a global impact potential. If a large asteroid is on course to cause widespread destruction, listening to the official warnings, government and space agencies will provide guidance. Evacuate if possible. If you're on a predicted impact zone, leaving may be the only option. Prepare for long term effects. A large impact could cause wildfires, earthquakes, or even climate change, climate disruptions like nuclear winter, the thing they talk about. General preparedness, just stay informed, following NASA, the European Space Agency, or any other emergency agencies for updates. Keep emergency kits ready, including water, food, medical supplies, protective gear. Having a communication plan. Cell networks may fail. No alternative ways to reach your loved ones. And I have ham radios that I have on deck, right? Just for, you never know. You never know. For any sort of event where cell networks could go down. It's always cool to have some ham radios on deck. They have portable ones that are pretty cheap. And, like I've seen them as cheap as $25. So it's like, why wouldn't you already have some of those on deck? But you would probably need something like that for communication. And then kind of moving this along, how can we survive a large event? Now, I thought about this, right? Because if we had a large event and know this thing we're talking about 2032 is not supposed to be a large event, but if we were faced with one, which I think you should never feel 100% certain, especially when we're talking about 95% of objects tracked, but 5% not. 5% not tracked is enough to at least have a plan, right? At least thinking of a plan, at least have thought of something that you could do if a situation like that did present yourself. I used to look at doomsday preppers, 10, 15 years ago, and I used to laugh at these guys. They were stocking up, they were building bunkers, they were doing all these things to prepare for things that I felt like in that moment were not likely or not possible, right? Those thoughts have kind of changed over the years because there are, we have nuclear wars potentially that could be on the horizon. There's a lot of reasons why prepping would probably be at least something that you have in the back of your mind. Doesn't have to be asteroid related. It could be, like I said, war. It could be uh, collapse of the economy. We almost through COVID, right? And I'll say COVID. You're not supposed to say COVID, but during that little brief period, you saw society break down in a way where things were different, right? So it's just a good idea to be prepared than not be prepared. Is how I feel about it. So, how could you survive a large event? How could we? Because I would want to help as many people as possible, right? So, detecting and tracking systems. This is some of the ways that we can defend ourselves or defend the planet, right? The first step in planetary defense is finding and monitoring near Earth objects or NEOs, which we're currently doing. Key detection programs, there's some of that are currently in place that give us hope to, be able to get through one of these or at least be aware so that we can plan for the best outcome, right? Would be NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office, which oversees US efforts to detect and mitigate asteroid threats. Then we have the Near Earth Object Observation Program, the NEOO, which uses a telescope to track asteroids. So that's cool. We have the NEO Surveyor, which is supposed to be an upcoming project in 2027. NASA's upcoming space telescope dedicated to finding hazardous asteroids. Awesome. Another tool in the tool belt, something that we definitely need. The European Space Agency, or ESA's NEOMIR, NEOMIR, not set for the 2030s, but it's a space-based infrared telescope designed to detect asteroids approaching from the sun's direction. That would be a game changer, because right now we don't have anything to combat those. Those are the ones that we don't see coming in. That's Chelyabinsk. So we get that up and running in the 2030s, we're looking okay. But this particular one we're talking about is set to hit before then, right? So, but it's cool for the future. So hopefully this one doesn't hit us, and we have this new array that allows us to now detect more objects. Is the best scenario that we could be in. Atlas and Pan-STARRS, Hawaii, Catalina Sky Survey, Arizona, and others, ground-based telescopes scanning the sky for asteroids. And then on top of that, there are the capabilities that we currently have, which we displayed on, I think it was Apophis. We sent the craft up there to kind of, see if we could knock it off course a little bit, which was an effective thing. There are some other things that we have that we're trying. So if an asteroid is on a collision course with Earth, we have a few possible ways to redirect or destroy it. A kinetic impactor, which was tested successfully. The DART double asteroid redirection test in 2022. NASA's DART mission successfully crashed a spacecraft into an asteroid Dimorphos, altering its orbit. This proved that we can change an asteroid's trajectory with the kinetic impact. So great. That's a big one. Future plans scaling this up for larger asteroids. Okay. A gravity tractor, which is unproven but theoretical, a spacecraft that could hover near an asteroid using its gravitational pull to slowly alter its course over time. Now, this method is slow and best for long-term threats, decades of advance warning needed. That's the other thing. In a lot of cases, we need a good cushion of time to deploy these things, these tools that we have, for them to work. So, but at least we have them, right? Amongst other things we probably don't know about, which we'll probably get into as well. Hopefully we are spending some of this black budget money, hint, hint, on planetary defense. I really hope that's one of my real hopes. We know they're sinking it into other things, weapons and yada, yada. But I'm hoping at the very least that they're spending a good chunk of that money on just planetary defense, just threats that come from outside, whether that be extraterrestrial, whether that be, an asteroid or anything that comes in from the outside, solar flare, anything that comes from off Earth that could affect us down here. I hope we are spending money on protecting the planet, right? Nuclear option, extreme last resort, right? Nuclear explosion near an asteroid, not on it, could push it off course without shattering it into dangerous fragments. Some studies suggest that this could be the most effective last-minute option for large asteroids. Let's see. Solar sails and laser ablation. These are experimental concepts. A laser or concentrated sunlight could heat up one side of an asteroid, creating a thrust effect that changes its trajectory. Solar sails could also redirect small asteroids over long periods. The many tools as we can get, the more the better. So in the moment, if we have enough time, we can deploy all these things, and hopefully one of them works, but at least we'll have a good toolbox to attempt to ward off any threat here. That would be awesome. That would definitely be awesome. So, emergency response plans. Now, this is a big one. This is a big one. This is where it kind of gets yeah, I mean, you'll see. You'll see where this goes. So, emergency response plans, if deflection isn't possible, governments are preparing for impact response and mitigation. NASA, FEMA, and the European Space Agency conduct asteroid impact drills to plan evacuation and disaster response. So if they're doing that behind the scenes, I'm sure they probably are. I hope they are. The International Asteroid Warning Network coordinates global response efforts. Okay. How are we ready? How ready are we, rather? How ready are we? Now, we can track most large asteroids, but need better detection for smaller ones. And we agree on that. DART proved kinetic deflection works, but larger scale missions would be needed for big threats. We understand that. Nuclear deflection is a last resort option, but could be effective. Yeah, hopefully other things work. We don't have to go to that, but yes. More funding and research are needed to prepare for future threats. Of course, it's always about the money at the end of the day. Biggest weaknesses, blind spots, which was proven with the Chelyabinsk. Asteroids coming from the direction of the sun, like the Chelyabinsk event, are hard to detect. Short warning times, which we talked about a moment ago. Some asteroids are just found days or hours before the impact. Lack of fully operational deflection missions. We need a dedicated planetary defense system that can launch quickly. Agreed. I don't know how we accomplish that. I don't know if some of the things we're working on in those secret rooms are going to be things that can do this. I know there's like all sorts of laser technology and things that supposedly they're working on. So maybe at some point we can shoot a laser at a asteroid that's 1,000,000 miles away and kind of without having to send a spaceship there. So maybe that's in the works. It's just something we don't know about yet. Hopefully. And then this is where we kind of get into it, which is just as us, right? Because this is us depending on. Hopefully, our governments have developed this tech. Hopefully, these space agencies have thought these processes through, and they saved the day for humanity. But in the event that they can't, this is one thing I always say: we have natural places that we could go potentially to kind of survive a lot of these things, right? And one of the places, and people probably overlook this, but maybe you think about it often. I don't know. One of the places that I've thought about and maybe should be on the list for people to think about are caves. Caves, they're everywhere. They go deep underground. If we were to have a nuclear event, I would want to go. I don't have a bunker to go into. I would go into a cave immediately in a nuclear event. So for sure, in an asteroid event, I would definitely do that. Some of the benefits of this: shielding from heat and blast and heat. Large asteroid impact could generate extreme heat and powerful shock waves. Being underground in a cave could reduce exposure to intense heat, fires, and flying debris. Radiation and fallout protection. If an asteroid impact kicks up dust and debris into the atmosphere, it could block sunlight, cause acid rain, or radiation exposure from cosmic effects. A cave provides natural shielding against these hazards. Tsunami protection. If you're in an inland cave, if the impact occurs in the ocean, it could generate massive tsunamis. Being in a cave far enough for the coastlines or at higher elevations would reduce that risk. Protection from aftershocks. Large asteroid impacts could trigger earthquakes and secondary effects. Some caves, particularly those in stable rock formations, which I think is an important thing to consider, in stable rock formations may provide better structural security than buildings. And the whole thing about that is Maybe you get a better understanding of, if you had to go in a cave, what would be the best type when we're talking about stable rock, right? That could take an impact and hold its structure. uh, then maybe those are the type of caves that you map out, right? Or you put on your list saying, hey, in the worst case scenario, this is a cave that fits those characteristics, gives you the best chance of, surviving an event and being able to come out okay, right? Because I think at the end of the day, where else would you go? Where else would most of us go? We don't have a place to go, right? So in an event like that, that's where we would go. That's where historically we've gone as, primitive humans. We went to the caves, right? So it literally be the same thing. It'd be us kind of going back into that mode and survival, right? Essentially. So some challenges, and this is kind of where you'd be able to say, okay, you don't just go in any cave, right? You choose the right sort of cave that has the right characteristics, because risks of just going in any cave obviously is going to be structural collapse. If the cave is unstable rock or near an impact zone, the shock wave could cause cave-ins, trapping people inside. Not a good day. Not a good day. Lack of resources. Long-term survival would require water, food, and breathable air. Caves with underground water sources would be preferable, right? Okay, bing. So you find a cave with stable rock that has an underground water source. A lot of them do. That's Then you got two things marked off the list as a viable place that you might go in a situation where something happened like that. Airflow and ventilation. Some caves have poor ventilation, which could become an issue if dust, smoke, or toxic gases enter. Bringing air filters and masks could help, obviously. Flooding risk. The impact affects weather patterns. Heavy rains and rising groundwater could flood certain caves. Avoid low-lying cave systems, obviously. Best types of caves for shelter: deep, structurally sound caves, limestone or volcanic caves with strong ceilings. So you put that on your list and you map out caves that fit that, right? Caves with multiple exits to avoid being trapped. In best case scenario, that you would obviously do that. Caves with access to fresh water, as we talked about. So are caves a good shelter? Really, in a situation like that, it's probably the only shelter, unless you have built yourself some top notch, unless you've bought one of those missile silos that take you deep underground, and you'll be okay. But not most of us don't have that, right? So you'd have to go with your natural resources, and your natural resource from threats from above would be a cave. So, are these good shelters? Yes, with caution. Well chosen cave, far from the impact zone, structurally sound, stocked with supplies, could be an excellent place to take cover. However, it's essential to assess stability, ventilation, and resources before committing to it as a survival plan. Excuse me. And I agree with that. Make sure it checks off the list, right? I would go map one out myself, knowing all these things and the things to check off the list. Look on a map. You already know what where the limestone caves are. You already know that these would probably be the better ones. They have a lot of that loose rock in other types of caves. Probably wouldn't be a good place to go, and you got to know that ahead of time, or else you're just setting yourself up for defeat, right? So one of the main reasons we're even covering this is because it's all over the news that this asteroid named 2024 YR4 is set for possible impact December of 2032. And like I stated, when it first came out in the news, it was 1.2%, then it went up to like 2.3%, and now it's up to 3.2%, which is like 1 in 32 chance, which is enough for them to have held earlier today a live Q&A. Concerning enough to have a live Q&A set earlier today, where they had a couple experts up there. The viewers were concerned and calling in and asking questions, and have some of the answers that were given by these experts for this particular event. So they started off by explaining what is this asteroid. They stated that astronomers are still discovering more about 2024 YR4, but what they do know is that it's more than 20 meters wide, so more than 60 feet wide. That's big enough to demand our attention and puts it on level 3 of what's known as the Torino Impact Hazard Scale, a system used to determine how big a threat an asteroid poses to the planet. Level 3 is defined as a, quote, close encounter meriting attention by astronomers because it has a 1% or greater chance of collision capable of localized destruction. But this is still some way off of the disaster scenario of level 10, which is reserved for collisions capable of causing global catastrophe. It currently has a 3.1% chance of hitting us, raised yesterday by NASA from 2.3, and is estimated to be between 40 and 90 meters wide. So the estimate has gone up from, what did they just say, 20 meters, so 60 feet, to 120 to 270 feet. If it's on the higher end of that scale, we could be looking at a potential city killer. But as NASA estimations make clear, it is still overwhelmingly unlikely the asteroid will impact Earth. Probability of asteroid colliding with Earth has increased to 3%. So these are just snippets from the conversation that they released afterwards and some of the answers that these experts had given. So what do we need to know and how worried should we be? The answer was the asteroid is on a 4-year orbit and will travel between Mars and Jupiter before returning in 2028. Now, the probability that asteroid colliding with Earth has increased from 1 to 3%, but Oxford astrophysicist Professor Stephen Smart, who is part of the Atlas team that identified the asteroid, says, quote, don't worry. He explains that this probability is, quote, entirely expected and is, quote, still very low. Nothing much will change until 2028, he explains, when we will see the asteroid return. Okay. So according to this, not a lot to worry about, but the numbers are still higher than normal, right? A few weeks left to observe the asteroid. This is what experts are looking for. Question: what are we looking for in observations? Professor Stephen Smart points out that the asteroid is now 600 times fainter than before, and smaller telescopes can no longer see it. Larger and more complex telescopes will be keeping watch instead, looking out for specific measurements and to help calculate its orbit more precisely, he explains. There are only a few weeks of observations left, Smart adds, with the asteroid about to disappear until 2028. Not much more we can discover about its orbit before 2028. Question: will we know anything more about its trajectory before 2028? And the answer was, we won't know an awful lot more by April when the asteroid disappears, says Professor Stephen Smart. What will help is looking through pre-archival images to understand its orbit more and try to trace its movements there. But he doesn't think they will get much more insight on its orbit before it disappears and returns in 2028. There's going to be a period of time, the next 3 years, we won't see it anymore. It'll be too far away, and we won't really be able to gather any more data on it to understand what the trajectory would be until we're able to see it again in 2028. All right. This is how the size of the asteroid is being measured. The question was, what are the uncertainties over how big the asteroid is? The answers they gave was one of the key uncertainties we have in how big this asteroid is. Planetary scientist Tarek Daly says he explains that telescopes are largely looking in visible light to try to determine its size, which can make it difficult. Quote, if you are staring at a lump of coal in one hand and a piece of chalk in the other, the brightness that's coming back to your eye could be the same, he explains. He says the James Webb Telescope observations will directly measure the size of the object by looking at the infrared emission. We are actually measuring heat coming off the object, and we are not as sensitive to the uncertainties in the reflectivity of the object, Daly adds. Understanding how big this is would have significant implications on what the consequences could be. Okay, so these are even killed answers. Nothing really doesn't sound like anything really to be worried about, right? So that's cool. This asteroid is nothing like the one that wiped out the dinosaurs. Question: would the asteroid destroy Earth? Tarek Daly says current estimates put it between 40 and 90 meters or 130 feet to 300 feet wide, meaning it can cause a variety of impacts. People often think of the dinosaurs when they hear the word asteroid, but Daly points out that the meteor was the size of Mount Everest, which is insane, first of all. That's nothing like the scale of the rock we're dealing with here. The interesting thing to look for is its composition, says Professor Stephen Smart. If it's rocky, it may burn up and explode in the atmosphere, though that can still cause devastation, he explains. People may need to be evacuated in the unlikely event this asteroid collides with the planet, he adds. All right. And would we have enough time to respond to the asteroid? So the question is, will we have enough time to act if we need to? The answer was after April, we won't be able to see the asteroid until 2028. Tarek Daly says it would be challenging to only start thinking of solutions if they are needed in 2020. So it will be interesting to see what exactly space organizations do after the spring, he says. But as he has said a couple posts below, there are teams all over the world constantly practicing how to respond in certain situations. So it was important enough for them to do a live Q&A about it today, right? The concern level has raised amongst people around the world to where they felt like they needed answers. Maybe some of these people are in this track that they released as well, which we'll be looking at in a moment here. But if it's one of those things that that humanity, even if it doesn't affect us generally where we are located, if it's not going to be something that hits, it still may hit somewhere where there are people, right? So that's where it's still something that's important to humanity, this issue, right? This is how big it is. They gave a comparison, and this is where there's another video because there was a digital videographer who put together a simulation of what this event could be like. And I think we will show that. Yeah, let me show that to you right now. All right, this is a video that was put out within the last couple of days depicting what this could be if it were to actually hit the planet. Here we go. Okay, so if you could see that clear enough, it was a city that looked like New York City, very condensed and populated, but it showed it destroying the entire thing. So if it were to hit a city, it's literally a city killer that could potentially wipe out an entire city, which is mind blowing to even think about. Yes, on a global scale, everybody else would be fine, but to to live in a world where you see, even if it has been evacuated completely, a city fully decimated into dust in one event is still mind blowing and something we've never seen in the history of that we know of humanity, right? That is huge. And look at the size of this thing. It's as big as the Statue of Liberty. This is what the artist has depicted. The person who did the video depicted the object standing next to the Statue of Liberty, and it's as big as that. So imagine an object, even a 1 in 32 chance is definitely enough to be concerned about, especially when we're talking about a 7 year window. And then the fact of what in those 7 years, we won't even see it again for 3 years. By the time we see it again, we'll have maybe 4 years, maybe three and some change before they have a better idea of what the trajectory will end up being. That's a short window, very short window. Although I think we'll be able to minimize casualties. I believe we'll, with that much time, we'll be able to completely evacuate those areas. So I don't really even anticipate any casualties that would come, even if it did hit. So I think we'd be okay there. But here is the path. Here's the track that they have outlined for it. They said that this would be, as they look at it now, this is where it would potentially end up hitting. And let me get this up here. All right. And it labels the cities here, right? So you have large cities in the path like Bogota, Abidjan, Lagos, Khartoum, Mumbai, and Dhaka are all in that track, right? And some of those are very highly populated cities that we know of, and that this is the potential impact zone as we know of right now. 2028 that could change. It could actually at that point they could say, "Hey, there's zero chance of hitting anything," and we'd be okay. Just a little closer so you could see that zoomed in, but that is the potential impact zone. If it, with estimates done today, that's where they think that it would hit. So I think we'll be okay. I think we'll be all right. But you got to ask yourself, with all these mystery rocks out there that we don't know about, if something larger was discovered, what would the governments do? Do you think they would inform the public? Do you? We've all seen the movie Don't Look Up. Do you think the governments, if they knew something larger was going to happen, that they would tell us? Right? I don't know. I don't know. Here's some insight into potentially what they might do. Would governments tell the public? If there is enough time, months to years, yes. Governments and space agencies would likely announce that. NASA, European Space Agency, and other agencies publicly track asteroids, and amateur astronomers worldwide also monitor space. Evacuations, disaster preparedness, and possible deflection efforts would require public cooperation. And if an impact is survivable, localized disaster, non extinction level event like the one they're talking about in 2032, governments would likely issue warnings similar to hurricane or earthquake alerts. Emergency measures would be put in place, which would be evacuation, stockpiling supplies. So that would likely be the 2032 scenario, and everything would be okay. But if it was something larger that would have a greater impact, potentially one that we saw in the movie, Don't Look Up, would governments hide that? As they did in the movie. I think the movie pretty much gives you the answer, but the likelihood would be, would governments hide it? If the impact is imminent, days away and catastrophic global extinction event, some governments might withhold information to prevent mass panic, chaos, and economic collapse. In a doomsday scenario, they may prioritize government continuity, which is a key word. Continuity, government continuity, which should be bunkers, elite survival plans over public disclosure. I think you know what that means, right? If they believe there is no solution, there's nothing that they could do, if an asteroid were to be discovered too late to act, some leaders might choose to suppress information to avoid panic, looting, and societal breakdown. As sad as that sounds, right? What would likely happen? Even in this horrific scenario where it's too late to do anything and they've found this huge thing, scientists and independent astronomers would probably leak the information. And I think we saw that in the movie as well. And I think that would probably happen for sure because they have families. And obviously, I don't believe you could keep something like that bottled up. So scientists and independent astronomers would definitely blow the whistle on that. Governments might delay a full announcement while assessing the situation and preparing emergency responses. They would likely do that. Yeah. And if impact is certain, they would eventually have to acknowledge it, especially as media and amateur astronomers spread the news. So while secrecy is possible in extreme cases, it's more likely that at least some of the governments would warn the public, especially since asteroid tracking is not limited to government agencies. However, the full truth, the impact details, survival chances, government contingency plans may not be completely transparent. And sad to say, the only thing that would matter in an incident like that for most of these governments, probably all, would be the plan that they already have in place, which is the continuity of government, which does not include you or me or the average person, just doesn't. That's why you have to have that other plan, right? They have the bunkers built deep within mountains. You already know of some of the areas where they already have these things. These bunkers and places that they have are designed for government officials, the current president at the current time, the high levels of society and things of that nature, right? Those are built for them. They're there. You could go and see them now. You can go and see those bunkers now. They're not in use. They don't get put in use until there's some sort of thing that happens, whether it's nuclear or whether it's something like this. But they go in, they lock the doors. You don't get to go in. You or me or anyone we know, we don't get to go in. So that's why the only other option that we would have if a scenario presented itself, whether it was just nuclear and not an asteroid, right? Nuclear is very, on the horizon almost for a lot of countries, especially the one that I'm in America and a lot of other places, right? Cave systems are going to be the savior for humanity that gets to survive after a moment like this. It's going to be those cave systems. As crazy as that sounds today, you live in a cushy house. You're not thinking about caves. You're not thinking about that kind of stuff. but it should probably be in the back of your mind. Just at least knowing, okay, you can't just go in any cave. This is the type of cave you probably should be looking for if you ever had to, and just knowing where those things are on a map. Because when it comes to government continuity, that plan doesn't include you or me. As sad as that sounds, it just doesn't. So, with that being said, this is why disclosure needs to happen first. And that's kind of how we get back around to that because, yes, there's this rock in 2032 that has the potential of hitting this planet. It's gone up in probability now. It may go back down to zero in probability at some point. But just the thought of even having to contemplate something like that and then maybe having that be a reality before we actually get to a disclosure point is the mind-blowing thing because disclosure needs to happen first because our visitors, these extraterrestrials that we know that we've talked about, that people have had encounters with, that or have these ships in the sky that the government is trying to say they're trying to figure out what it is, that people are having interactions with, and all these things. These might be disclosure might be the thing opening up that line of communication with whatever these things are might be the thing that saves the planet overall, right? Because you got to think there's a good chance that extraterrestrials have dealt with a situation like this. You would think if they've been around way longer than we have and they lived on a planet or currently do, all planets are subject to this sort of situation. All planets, right? So they would likely know how to deal with something like this. They would likely know how to, they would likely have even developed a way to defend the planet, something we haven't even thought about yet. Some out the box idea of how we could do this, right? And they have the knowledge of that. Um, the question is, would they help defend ours? They're here. We know they are. Would they, in this moment, help defend ours? If this 2032 thing was a more serious thing, it's still serious, but if it was like extinction level sort of asteroid, would they help defend? Right? That's why we have to open up those lines. I don't know how we do that. Bringing disclosure doesn't necessarily mean we automatically are talking to these things, but it's at least the first step to doing that. And so disclosure is something that can happen as early as tomorrow, right? So when we look at a 7-year window, we should have been had disclosure and at least had the ability to potentially open up the lines of communication that could eventually save the planet that we're sitting on, right? Because the only other plan that we have is Elon Musk's plan, which is to relocate to Mars. But even in that situation, we've talked on other shows. How many people do you think get a seat on that Starlink or Star, whatever the ship is called that he had, the Falcon 9 rocket? How many people get a seat on that? Not a lot. A lot of people are going to be sitting back here on this planet still while those people get to go over to that planet. And it's the same situation, right? So that it just we bring it back to disclosure because there shouldn't be a world where this incident happens before we get disclosure. Disclosure has to happen first, and by it happening first, it may actually open up that window of hope and opportunity that we don't currently see or realize right now, right? So, thought it was going to end on a somber note, but it ends with hope because the hope is there. We're literally right there when it comes to, kicking in this disclosure door. And I really feel like, I don't think that for one, if something like a huge event, I don't think they would stand by and just let it happen. I just feel like they wouldn't, right? I just feel like they wouldn't because I feel like even if they don't connect with us on any other level, I think they understand what the threat of an impact is. And I just don't see a situation where they would just sit back and allow it to happen. So I think even if we technically hadn't opened the lines of communication, I still think they might step in and try to do something. I just feel that, but we have a better chance, obviously, by opening up those lines of communication. So we're going to leave on a high note, which I think is awesome. I think it's very awesome, even though this is a real, very real thing that we're dealing with, guys. So took you on a roller coaster of a ride here. It does not end with doom and gloom, although we do have to figure this thing out, you know, and get to this point where we have ascended to a point of disclosure. And I really think that we will. Ladies and gentlemen, that has been Asteroid before disclosure, but hopefully disclosure before the asteroid. Guys, that's a wrap. This is the definitive UFO news show. Glad to put this show on for you guys, and hope you enjoyed it. Hope you appreciated it. And if you're here for the first time, please make sure you hit that like button, the little thumbs up. Let us know if you like the show. Let us know as well by hitting that subscribe button and maybe coming back for future shows. We have tough conversations, as you see, but you know, we're optimistic in the future of humanity, and that's kind of what we do here. So coming soon, social bits right here on the Social Dig, which is pre-recorded short form content. I'm working on that in the background. We're going to create these little short bits, bite-sized 15, 20-minute maybe things, maybe less than that, 10, 15-minute things, pre-recorded that we'll be putting out on different subjects, different topics for you to consume and enjoy. Also, we have a few shows here. So you're at the Definitive UFO News Show right now. We normally have our Social Dig show, which airs on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific. We have the My Experience with the Phenomena, where viewers like yourself come on stage and talk about your experiences. And I would love to book a few people so we can run some more episodes of that. And if you were here last night, you experienced the late night call-in show, which we might do a round 2 tonight. If not, well, we'll try to do one tonight. If not, it's normally Saturdays at 11:30 p.m. Pacific time. I will be out of town on Saturday though, or I won't. Yeah, I'll be out of town Saturday. I'll be out of town Sunday. So Saturday I'll be okay. So we can do the show Saturday. But yeah, make sure you go ahead and hit the subscribe button, come back here, and we have an awesome time. Great conversations. Like I said, sometimes they're tough, sometimes they're rough. If you saw the Gary Nolan piece we did earlier in the show, go back and watch my Skeptics versus Experiencers show, and you'll see exactly what I meant by what I said earlier. And if Gary Nolan does watch these shows, shout out to Gary Nolan. Hit me up. Let me interview you. It'd be all good. Or at the very least, if we're at least thinking alike, then that lets me know that what we're doing, we're touching the right subjects and we're having the right conversations. And that's okay with me. And I hope it's okay with you. With that being said, let me go ahead and thank our members. We do have memberships available on this channel. You can join at any time by clicking the description, and there's a link right in there. Shout out to our members who help make this show possible and the other shows that you see here. And Joanne, the Beekeeper, D. Nunley, Maggie M10, Flat 6, Miss Catherine Jones, Cosmic Joe Chronicles, Wes Decker, a W. Decker, Still Pooh 69, Polly Rotterman, Lil Cam 51, Frankie B, Fast Timmy. We also have the Social Shop, and we're going to go ahead and run a commercial because we have these exclusive humanity shirts, and the information order will be right here. So I'll play that for you. I'll be right back, and we'll wrap up the show. Welcome to the Social Shop, courtesy of the Social Dig. I am Mr. Rob G, and we are bringing you exclusive gear, and tonight's no different. We have humanity t-shirts, the positive progression of humanity. Yes, you can go out into the world and proudly show everyone what humanity means to you. $32.99. And remember, if you're a social soldier, you get an additional 20% off the price. That's right. Being a social soldier gets you an additional 20% off. And keep in mind, depending where you are in the world, shipping fees and taxes will be applied. Bringing you exclusive gear right here at the Social Shop on the Social Dig. All right. Fantastic. It's been a great time, guys. Let me go ahead and take a look in the chat real quick before we get to go. Also, super chats are available on this channel, Cash App as well. Anything that ever comes into the show goes to making sure that we put on the best show possible. As you see, we have many shows and we are always trying to raise the bar. We do this always for the positive progression of humanity. That's what matters to us here. Having conversations that move the needle and move humanity in a positive direction. And that's what we hope to do by the end of every show. And I think we've done that tonight. With that being said, let me go ahead and thank everyone who is still here. Let's see. Queen Peachy King D. I see you out there. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate you, Scott Rosen. Thanks for showing up. Let's see. Cat's Tongue as well. And I'm going through some names that I didn't get to earlier. Cat's Tongue. Let's see here. Dil Yu Woo Poo. Appreciate you. Let's see. Kurt M. Appreciate you. And I'll go back through everyone else too. Magneticus Attractus. Thanks for showing up. Let's see. Scott Rosen. I said Scott Rosen will say it again. Let's see here. We got and a few other people here. President Zaddy. Wow. Hey, President Zaddy. Long time no see. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate you showing up. Who else do we have here? Richard Minnick. Appreciate you coming on in. And I know I kind of just ran through the whole show and didn't say anything, but I just want to make sure we got through it. Let's see. Emperor Penguin, thanks for coming in. Kitty Catty Whack. Thanks for showing up. Frankie B, thanks for coming in. Kai Schneider, thanks for showing up. Will Cam 51, appreciate you coming in. And guys, that is a wrap. So like I said before, if you're lurking out there in the crowd, if you're watching this after the fact on Team Replay, please go ahead and consider hitting that like button and then hitting the subscribe, coming back, hit the notification bell so you know next time we go live. Outside of that, I'll be seeing you guys next time. Sooner than you know. Have a great rest of your day. Take care, guys.